It's strange how fast things can change. One moment Tyreek Hill was on the field, moving the way only he can, the body language of someone who trusts every fiber of his speed. The next, the movement stopped. A knee bent wrong. Silence wrapped around everything. It wasn't just pain. It was the kind of silence that tells you something has gone terribly wrong. Now, there's no way around it. A long road ahead, and no one really knows where it leads. He dislocated his knee against the Jets, tore multiple ligaments, including the ACL. Surgery came quickly. Words like successful procedure and recovery plan sound good on paper, but what do they really mean when a player like Tyreek Hill goes down? This isn't just another injury. This is the body of a player whose game depends on explosion, on angles, on everything that happens in fractions of seconds. A knee that has seen that kind of trauma doesn't simply return to normal because a doctor says the surgery went well. There's always something that lingers, doubt, hesitation, a shadow that wasn't there before. Hill's agent said all the right things. Drew Rosenhaus spoke about confidence, about avoiding another surgery, about being ready for week 1. Those words travel fast. They fill social media and talk shows. But deep down, everyone knows the truth. ACLs and dislocations don't play by optimism's rules. Healing is not a straight line. And when a player's identity is built around pure speed, around the ability to break games open in a heartbeat, any deviation from that line feels like a question that can't be answered yet. He's 31 now. That's not old for most people, but for someone like him, someone whose game depends on being the fastest human on the field, it feels like standing at the edge of something uncertain. This was supposed to be a bounce-back year. After 2024, when the offense felt off and he never quite looked like himself, there were signs again of that familiar electricity. Through 3 games, he averaged 66 yards a game, and that night against the Jets, he had already passed 67 before everything unraveled. It's almost cruel, the timing of it. The momentum was there, the rhythm returning. And then it wasn't. There's also the cold reality behind the scenes, the contract, the structure, the numbers that always have the final say. The extension he signed was called a 3-year, $90 million deal. But that last year? It was never meant to happen. Everyone knew it. It was a placeholder, a way to inflate the annual average, to make headlines about the highest-paid receiver. That 2026 cap hit, nearly $52 million, was more smoke than substance. Still, it looked impressive until this injury changed everything. Now, those details matter in a way they didn't before. The $29.9 million in base salary, none of it guaranteed except for the $11 million that locks in if he's still on the roster by the 3rd day of the 2026 league year. Add the $5 million roster bonus due that same day, and Miami would be committing $16 million just to keep him around. It's hard to imagine a scenario where that makes sense. Not when he might not even be cleared to play. Not when he won't pass a physical in time. The writing is almost too clear. Release before March, before any of that money turns real. So where does that leave him? The deal will have paid $52.6 million across 2 years. It sounds big, but it feels smaller when you realize what could have been. Maybe there's a world where he returns to Miami. Maybe not. Everything depends on what happens between now and 5 months from now. His health, the front office, the shifting priorities of a team that keeps finding itself one step away from the version it's trying to become. Because Miami isn't standing still. That's not what this franchise does. There's always movement, always noise, always that feeling that something big is about to happen. But look closer, and it's messier than it seems. Chris Greer, Mike McDaniel, both still under the microscope. The owner, Stephen Ross, said he wanted continuity, stability. He talked about belief, about trust, about the importance of staying the course. But he also made it clear, continuity doesn't mean comfort. It doesn't mean accepting good enough. It's a warning hidden in nice words. Keep pushing forward, or something changes. They needed that win against the Jets. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. 1-3 doesn't sound like the record of a team that has everything figured out, but maybe it's part of the process. Maybe it's just survival. Carolina comes next, and the Panthers have their own problems. But all eyes are elsewhere now. Every time someone mentions the Dolphins, the name Tyreek Hill echoes behind it. Not because of what he's doing on the field anymore, but because of what happens next. How does a player like that recover? What happens when the very thing that made you unstoppable is the thing that's been taken away? You can rebuild muscle, strengthen ligaments, run through endless drills. But what about the part that doesn't show up on MRIs? The trust between mind and body. Does it ever come back fully? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's why players talk about fear differently after injuries like this. Not fear of pain, but fear of losing that spark, that gear no one else has. And that's what made Tyreek Hill different. Not just speed, but what that speed represented. The way he tilted defenses. The way safeties played deeper just because of him. The way everything around him, Tua, Waddle, the offensive design, worked better when he was there. Without him, the field feels smaller. Defenses squeeze tighter. The space that once belonged to him now becomes contested ground. And no matter how creative Mike McDaniel is, you can't replicate that kind of presence. The locker room feels it too. Players won't say it directly, but they know what it means when someone like Hill goes down. The energy shifts. It's not hopelessness. It's a kind of silence that hangs around practices. You see it in how others move. The extra effort to fill a void that can't be filled. Someone like Tyreek doesn't just catch passes. He changes the emotional temperature of a team. That's not something you replace with the next man up. And maybe that's what makes all of this heavier. Because it's not just a football story, it's a human one. The body breaking down in a sport built on collisions isn't new. But every time it happens, it feels like a reminder that the line between greatness and fragility is razor thin. For years, Hill made it look easy. The cuts, the bursts, the touchdowns that made entire stadiums gasp. But behind that, there's always been a risk. Every sprint is borrowed time. Every season, a race against what the body can still do. Now, the race looks different. The goals change. It's no longer about the next record, the next highlight. It's about walking again without pain. About trusting that leg. About believing that something still burns inside even when everything around you says maybe it's over. That's the quiet part no one talks about. The part after the surgery, after the headlines. When the world moves on, but the rehab room stays the same. Hours of repetition. Small victories that no one celebrates. The hum of machines. The constant stretch of patience. This is where careers are rebuilt or quietly fade. And the question keeps hanging. Does Miami wait? Or does it move on, like the league always does? Loyalty sounds good, but the NFL doesn't trade in sentiment. It trades in production, in availability, in numbers that fit neatly into salary caps. Hill's numbers once justified everything. Now they complicate everything. And as much as fans want to believe he'll come back, stronger, faster, ready to prove everyone wrong, it's a story that rarely ends that way. Still, you can't count him out. He's been underestimated before. Drafted late, doubted early. He turned himself into one of the most feared receivers of his generation. Maybe that's what keeps the hope alive. If anyone can fight through this, maybe it's him. But time isn't an ally anymore. The league gets younger every year. Faster, too. The next wave is already coming, and it never waits. Meanwhile, the Dolphins stand at a crossroads they didn't expect this soon. Without Hill, everything changes. Tua loses his safety net. Defenses adjust. The offensive rhythm that once thrived on chaos now has to find balance. There's still Waddle, there's still speed, but it's not the same. Every play feels slightly different without the shadow of number 10 sprinting across the field. The playbook shrinks in invisible ways. Maybe McDaniel find a way to reinvent it. He's creative enough. Maybe this becomes the season where the team learns to win differently. Less flash, more grit. Maybe it's what they needed all along. A reminder that this game doesn't care how beautiful it looks. It just demands you keep going. And through all of it, Tyreek watches. Rehab becomes routine. Updates get shorter. The questions grow quieter. But somewhere in that silence, something stirs. Athletes like him don't fade quietly. They don't accept endings. Maybe that's the story still being written. The comeback no one expects. The version of him that refuses to let this be the last memory. Still, it's impossible to ignore the reality that hangs over everything. March 2026 feels close now. Decisions will be made long before the next kickoff. Miami will look at the numbers, the scans, the timelines, and decide. And when they do, there won't be sentiment involved. There rarely is. Maybe Hill knows that already. Maybe that's why he's fighting not just to recover, but to remind everyone that he's still Tyreek Hill. Because for all the contracts, all the press releases, all the statements about stability and leadership, this league has a short memory. It remembers the last play, the last season, the last injury. But it also remembers the ones who came back when they weren't supposed to. The ones who rewrote their own endings. Maybe that's what this becomes. Maybe that's what's left. The speed might not return the same way, but something else might. Something harder to measure. Resilience. Pride. The refusal to fade. And maybe that's enough. Maybe, when the lights come back on and the field stretches wide again, number 10 will be there. Not the same, but still standing. And maybe that's all that matters.